Yeah. I have been playing video games since I was about 6 years old. And later on in life, I realized that video games is my ultimate passion. I fell in love with video games not only because it was a great form of entertainment, but also because they taught me how to handle certain real-life situations, keep my mind sharp, and how to expand my creativity overall. In 2006, a study involving video games was conducted by MSU psychology professor Linda Jackson. The study took 3 years to complete and consisted of studying 6 groups of 12-year-olds. With this study, Professor Jackson confirmed my assumptions about what video games did for my life. She discovered that video games help improve basic math, science, and engineering skills, which leads me to my major claim that video games are beneficial to children. Now, why is that, you may ask? Why is it that video games are so good? Why is it that they're so beneficial to these kids, right? So, let me explain. First of all, video games help to exercise a longer attention span. James Gee, who is an education professor at the University of Wisconsin and wrote a book about what video games can teach us, mentions that kids that do not have a good attention span due to certain degrees of ADHD are still able and willing to play games for many consecutive hours on the computer or on consoles, which I totally agree with because I've had a couple 6-hour sessions on my own without really realizing how much time has gone by. But you see, video games attract the attention of children in a way that school just doesn't, because they're being challenged and they're being entertained at the same time. The players don't just sit and watch a television screen all the time when they play video games. They actually get to engage. They actually get to interact with the gameplay action and find solutions to the problems that are being presented to them. So now that I've talked about what it can do for individuals' attention span, let's look more into what it can do for the skills. Video games help to improve visual and reading skills. Researchers from the University of Rochester in New York did a study to test the skills of frequent game players since childhood versus individuals who didn't play as much during their childhood and still don't. The researchers found out that players between the ages of 18 and 23 were better at observing their surroundings than those who didn't play as often or didn't even play at all. The regular gamers could also keep track of more objects at one time and are faster at picking out objects from a chaotic environment. Also, kids who play computer games often end up knowing more about computers than even their parents. Now, most games require the individual to read what other players or characters are saying to them. In addition, some games provide multiple options or actions to help them be more familiar with decision-making. Decision-making games also helps the child to become more decisive when faced with real-life situations. And because the children are so involved and engaged in these video games, they don't even realize that they're reading at a level well above their own grade. So it's really good because they're actually getting their reading intake without even realizing it. So now that we've talked about the attention span and what it can do for skills, let's move on to interests. Video games can inspire new interests in children. Professor Gee was studying a group of kids who are currently playing the game Age of Mythology. His son was also part of the study, and he noticed that the kids had been involved with the game for a couple weeks. And he noticed that the children would do something very interesting to him. He said that these kids would often go to the library and they would check out mythology books because they were so interested in this game that was about mythology. And so he realized that the game sparked some kind of curiosity in these kids, motivating them to want to know more about the history that came to life to them through these games. In conclusion, video games can be very beneficial to children. Not only can video games enhance many of their skills as they grow up, but they're also really fun and entertaining in an entertaining way to get children to learn about something useful that they can take with them into adulthood. Thank you.
All right, you've got a pretty clear statement of the proposition at the beginning, and I thought you had a nice lead into the subject, creating some interest on it. There's no layout of what the main points are going to be, but internally, as you get to each of those points, they're signposted very clearly, so organizationally everything's pretty solid. From the beginning, you start citing sources and trying to qualify those sources. You're very dependent upon the one source. I think you quote it in 3 or 4 different places, and so I think you want to look for a little bit more external information on that, on some of those points. There's like I said, good authority in the quotes that you give, and I believe that some of these people probably have good expertise on this, but it seems to me like some big inferences are being made from the research, and we don't get any statistical support on that, especially on that second point when you're talking about reading abilities. And at one point you mentioned, their decision skills are better, or they're reading at levels far above their grade level, and I don't have any information supporting that. I just have somebody who has decided that that's the case that you're quoting, and we're being asked to trust that authority. And I think you need something a little stronger than that. There's some nice examples. You've got a personal example that you use early on, and then Ye's son, you talk about that, although I don't know how many kids go rushing looking at the mythology books based on the games that they're playing. It's an interesting example, but is it a typical example? Is it representative of what most kids do when they're involved with the video games? I think that that's something that you need more information on. So the generalizations, I think, are a little bit problematic. The evidence on the supporting points, you have evidence on each of the points, but it's a little bit thin, so on sufficiency, I think there are some problems. I thought the presentation was really excellent. You tend to speak to the audience for the most part. Everything flows very smoothly. You're engaging, and you're talking to us and explaining how you see things, and there's a lot of variety in the way you present the information, too. All right, thank you.